You got it open?
I got a cold open.
Okay, I'm gonna clap and then I'm gonna sit back and I'm gonna let you hit it.
Will,
Yes.
happy birthday.
Happy birthday to me?
Yeah, how does it feel being 5?
Well, you see, I was born on February 29th. No. Also, that's where you were going with this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh man. Well, we're in Carson's house, so that's lovely. Thank you for hosting
It's
in
good
person.
to have you here. Good to be in person.
First Upsample in person. Also, first time we have done in-person pod together. Chris Fraser hosted you on RCP in person.
Yep.
So that was at a former place of yours.
That was
Right?
that was at Chris's place.
Oh, was at Chris's place?
David
Oh,
and I went
okay.
over on a very sleepy Sunday and recorded that podcast.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I know what you're getting at. And so that Rhythm Changes has turned 5 years old. So I'm feeling very, very good about that. So thank you for humoring me.
A huge milestone. Man, that seems they grow up so fast, I would say.
Yeah. It's on one hand, it feels like no time at all. And on the other hand, it feels like a ridiculous amount of time. I was talking to Vez about that over this weekend and just thinking about, oh man, sometimes it feels like I've hardly gotten anywhere, but then of course what Vez tells me and what I got to think about is like, I'm on the other hand, there's so much stuff that has happened.
Totally.
So.
If I think back to like when you told me the initial idea, there was 0% of this existed, and now here we are.
Yeah, because the actual anniversary is the day before this episode of Upsample airs. Is June 19th, 2020.
Wow.
And it wasn't when I published the first thing. Rhythm Changes started on Substack.
Okay.
Because Substack was actually not really going off yet in 2020. It's funny, like all the trendy Substack stuff and all the controversies around Substack, they happened in, I guess in 21 and going into 22.
Yeah, people had to kind of hone their blogging craft before they got really big and realized they could make income off of it. So I think it took 2020 of people trying stuff out, and then Substacks took off.
Yeah, because at the time, not many people knew what Substack was. I certainly couldn't say I'm starting a Substack called Rhythm Changes. Like people didn't talk. Now you can. Now people talk that way. But I started on Substack, and what the anniversaries of where I'm choosing to start the Rhythm Changes birthday and why we can celebrate 5 years now, as opposed to some other times like when the gig list started or whatever, is because on June 19th, I started rounding up individual people, of which you were no doubt one, where I was like, hey, I'm going to start writing. Yeah. I haven't even done my first thing yet. Do you want to be like one of my first signups for free and just see what I do in 2020 when everybody was seeing what each other would do? And I waited until I got to 50 people. And I got to 50 people before July 1st. So the first thing I published was on July 1st, 2020. Okay. Yeah, because I reached out to, I don't know, maybe 100 people it could have been. And it was I guess it was over the time when there was no jazz festival. That's the other thing, is right now we're recording and the Vancouver International Jazz Festival is about to happen and all that stuff. But there wasn't one in 2020. So this is what I was doing at the time instead of whatever I'm about to do in the next week and a half. Was I was sitting at home asking people if they wanted to sign up to my newsletter that didn't exist.
Man. And humble beginnings, although that's a pretty good start that you made it to 50 before even your first post.
Yeah, I mean, it was an arbitrary number. You got to pick one.
Yeah.
Figured that one was good as any. I certainly didn't want to wait for like a larger number, like 100 or 200. I wasn't one of those people who was like funneling an existing social media following into it, because I was on and off social media a lot, and I didn't really know like what my actual... I didn't have a sense of me as a poster at this time. So what was I going to do, right? Yeah. I just kind of had to come up with something.
Yeah, and the grassroots approach makes sense when you had the network of friends who did care what you were up to. And especially at that time, there was like a few different kind of angles things could have gone COVID-wise and the live music scene. So I remember just being excited about it. And if it's not clear to the listener, I think what we're planning to do this episode is talk a little bit about Rhythm Changes, the website, the podcast, some of the history, and some of the things that have kind of touched on that, because it's been a really big part of the scene and been a really interesting part. I mean, I'm interested in it as like an outsider from the last few years, and so I'm excited to hear more, some stories, some retrospective.
Yeah, man, I appreciate not only that you would have me into your house to chat, but that you would chat about this before we kind of go off and do different things, because we're going to take one episode break after this. I'm going to be hitting the Jazz Fest hard. You're going to be out of town. So it's nice to have the in-person hang and to hook it up with this episode 12. But it's funny that we're doing this now here because early Rhythm Changes, this in 2020, right, on Substack. There's no gig list yet. There's no podcast yet. Yeah. These things come in a certain order, I guess, subsequently. But what was early Rhythm Changes in that very first time when there was no audience? It was like this. Like the topics that I wrote about just from week to week was whatever was interesting to me from whatever I was reading and listening to at the time. And like my content diet and interests were pretty similar back then as they were now. So I wrote about like music business topics and things like that. I wasn't interviewing artists yet. I started doing that in the fall once some stuff, I started to notice like the couple of things that were actually happening. And then it occurred to me that I wanted to have an excuse to get to meet more artists and stuff. That's all it's ever been for 5 years. So that's when I realized that it's like, okay, that's got all the motivation I need this is how I talk to people.
Totally. And I mean, by that measure, it's been an enormous success, right? I remember you talking about maybe even earlier on this, and certainly on interviews where you at Rhythm Changes, maybe on the Q&As or when Chris has talked to you, that feeling of like, that was your plan to kind of revisit the scene that you had kind of stepped out of a little bit, right? That like by blogging about it, by talking to these people, you'd kind of, I don't know, ingratiate seems like the wrong word because you weren't like uningratiated. Like there was no necessarily bad blood, but you were able to like, you know, get yourself back into the scene. And again, by that measure and with that intention, I think you've more than succeeded, right? Like we've been hanging out and people have walked up to you at gigs that we have nothing to do with to introduce themselves and say that they like Rhythm Changes or that they're, you know, people reach out to you now also to like remind you about their gigs on the gig list.
Yep.
So you are not only like, you know, quote unquote, back in the scene from 2020, you're like a major part of the scene, which is very cool.
Yeah, it's very cool. I mean, it's not what I would have expected. I have a story about how I did feel like there was bad blood though. Yeah. And how Rhythm Changes actually pretty quickly helped me erase it.
Yeah.
You know, I don't remember some of my very, very young years all that fondly, even though this was around the time that we met and we have a lot of continuous mutual friends from around this time period. So like it wasn't all tough.
Yeah.
But some of it was tough. And I have this one gig experience that I talk about a lot. I don't have a full on record print of this story up right now on rhythmchanges.ca, and I haven't told the full story with names and everything on any episode of the podcast, but it's something I've alluded to.
Yeah.
But I did actually do that once. I did it on the early Rhythm Changes on the Substack. I sent this out, and I kind of aliased the people or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't know what the audience size was at this time, starting from 50. It was between 50 and 100 people, right? I called it the worst gig of my life at the time.
I remember the post, although not all the details because that was about 5 years ago. Yeah.
And that was one that I didn't bring over to the website when I changed to having an actual website. Right. Maybe if I had the same mindset about Rhythm Changes then as I did now, maybe I would have for the archival purposes or whatever. Maybe preserving an on-record thing and not taking too many things away would have... well, it is important to me now, but I could have made it important to me back then, but I didn't. I didn't bring it over. But I mean, people would have this in their inboxes maybe if they dug back far enough, the original version of it. So whoever was in that early audience, I sent out a version of this story called The Worst Gig of My Life.
Yeah.
And one of the people who was in that first 50 was one of the people in the story.
Whoa, okay.
But I didn't know actually that he was there. He might not have even been on the mailing list yet at the time of the send.
Okay.
He might have found out about it from somebody else. And I don't know who exactly. I mean, there's a short list of people who could have shared it to him, right?
Yeah. The subject of the story read the story?
He's not the primary subject, but he is in the story.
Interesting.
And like he's one of the 5 people who are really in the story.
Wow.
And like it's not a secret who it is. This person is David Blake, the guitar player.
He was on that gig.
Yeah, he was a part of this story.
Okay, right. Okay, yeah.
He is not the reason why it was the worst gig, but he was part of the story. He was there.
Right, okay.
And he ended up reading it.
Interesting.
And I didn't know that he was going to end up reading it.
Yeah.
And all this time, you know, from age 20 to 25, I kind of thought like he and all these other people were just like, oh, whatever. Like they wouldn't want anything to do with me, or they wouldn't think very highly of me because they would think of me as like that guy who did those dumb things back then, and that was it. And I had been so removed for like 5 years that that's actually how I thought all these people still thought of me. And I thought there was like a bad, I was inventing like a bad blood thing in my mind. But then he reached out to me, and it was very clear right away that wasn't the case. And so that was like the beginning of a friendship that I didn't manage to have with David Blake back then. Like, he's been in New York so much of this time, and we're not super close. We don't talk all the time, but like, of course I would consider him like a friend and a homie, and like, but I didn't, like, when we were starting this thing, because I had been removed from this story that sucked. And then I wrote about it, and it saved something about that. Like, I ended up feeling a lot better.
Right.
And like ready to be back in the scene and stuff. That
he could have read that and then kind of reach back out to you and say like, hey, it wasn't... No one is mad at you about that story, right? Like that.
I needed to hear that.
Yeah, that's very awesome. Do you want to like briefly for this audience rehash kind of, you don't have to get super into it, but just like the contours of that story and what happened on that fateful gig?
Yeah, I could do a super quick version of the contours of that story. The super quick version was I got hired for a gig that was too heavy for me at the time. I was abusing alcohol. One of the guys who hired me was abusing alcohol. I got up on that stage. I was not prepared to play the music. I played the music very badly. I was not aided and assisted all that much by the other musicians. It wasn't necessarily their job to do it either.
Right.
Ended up being a really tough look for me. Ended up being a really tough experience for me that I wanted to kind of not allow myself to recreate after that. And it stuck with me for ages. Yeah.
Yeah. And, that's like, we've all had awful gigs. Maybe not to that extent, especially when you're that feeling of being out of your element. We've all had those where you get on the bandstand and you're like, ooh, man, this is maybe not, I've certainly had this in work environments as well as in music environments, and that feeling of like unpreparedness as something's not going the way you hoped. But oftentimes the people who you're there with, they do not perceive it as poorly as it feels when you're in the driver's seat. So I'm sorry that happened, but I'm also glad that, you were able to move past it and learn from it. And yeah.
And then David Blake, he becomes one of the launch episodes of RCP. Yeah. He's one of the people because he's got some of the most interesting stories I want to talk to him about. At the time, I called it like the end of the Tangent era. Little did I know what would end up happening. But Tangent Cafe, our kind of music venue that we came up in, small venue in the scene, it came back after COVID, even though at the time we were like eulogizing it because it had ended when COVID started. Came back, and then it changed names and changed ownership so many times, and now it's gone, and now it's back as a totally different restaurant concept and name. But like in the spring of 21, we kind of eulogized the first Tangent Cafe era today, and that was like the first episode of RCP that kind of spread around the scene a little bit, and I felt very comfortable having an open conversation with him at that time because we had just kind of, for me, healed that bridge. For him, it was probably like, oh, it's kind of weird that he wrote about this story, but I'm going to reach out to him to make sure that he knows everything's cool. But for me, it felt like something healed.
That's a very cool way that a full circle way that the Rhythm Changes kind of helped make things, help move things forward for you in a way that felt really positive. That is a very good episode of the Rhythm Changes podcast. And anyone who has not heard it, I would recommend them go back and check it out, especially if you've been to Tangent, it's worth listening to just to reminisce, but also if you've like been to the new place, is it Apollo's?
Currently?
It would be, I don't know, interesting to hear a little bit about the history of that space and like why they have jazz there and what it used to be like, and then you can contrast that with what it currently is. There's also, is that behind the paywall, the Apollo's review?
There's a few things that I'll mention, and I'll unlock whichever ones are not unlocked, but there's a few parts of the story that you could consume in succession now because we're looking back on it. So the David Blake very early RCP episode, that's like episode 5 or 6, came out in spring of 21. You go all the way back on the podcast feed or search him and find that. And then David comes back in 2023 and he opens up in a written published interview about the ownership change.
Right.
The original ownership change that changed it to not Apollo's. It was something else. Daybreakers.
Daybreakers, yeah.
And he talks about how it lost its place as a venue.
Yeah.
So it's like we've eulogized it multiple times and now it's still around. And then I went to Apollo's. I don't know if I went there with you that time. I've been there with you subsequently, but I went there one time and I wrote about my experience there and what the venue was like at that time too. So we got a couple of different chapters of this story at Rhythm Changes, which is awesome, by the way. That's what I want it to be for. I hope I can just do things like that.
Yeah. And like you were saying about it, kind of, you're now having a more of like an archival mindset that like years in the future that we're kind of documenting the like history of a venue is very cool. And I think there's a lot, like that's maybe something that hasn't happened in the past. I think there's a lot of discussion, especially in a smaller scene like this and in a city that venues like we've talked about struggle to stay open. There's a lot of like what happened to such and such place, or like where was that place, or like who used to play there that's like not there. Do you think has talking to the people who ran the Vancouver Jazz websites before you, or even interacting with those sites and their absence, has that kind of, is that what drove the move towards like maybe more archival? You're also being journalistic about it, but like I think there's also historical exercise there. Is that the case?
Yeah. So there was a website called vancouverjazz.com. There was like a free weekly and gig list style thing. At Rhythm Changes, I do a free weekly email where I pull the week's upcoming events from a gig list webpage that publishes every month, where I do the list of all the Vancouver Jazz shows. And then in the free weekly email that I send out, I print what is on that list for the coming week, basically. So it got sent to people.
Right.
There was a guy, New Dadoon, who was one of the festival Jazz Fest co-founders, who did an email that was very much like my free weekly, where he had a list that he compiled, and he solicited signups for that email off of that website. That website was so many more things, though. Like there were a whole bunch of old photos. There were even old interviews in text form, and there was a forum, and but that website is currently offline.
Yeah.
And I don't know the real guy who or the person who most significantly worked on maintaining the site is this guy, Brian Nation.
Okay.
And I may have met him once or twice, but I don't really know him.
Yeah.
Got a lot of mutuals. So he's still kind of one of my people that I haven't managed to connect with at Rhythm Changes. So if I'm going to learn more about that, I have to make that happen, because I haven't made that happen with him. But I have seen that it sucks that website is offline.
Yep.
Because I just really hope that somebody didn't wipe the servers and that all that stuff isn't gone, because then it's like, oh, I could have archived it, or they could have archived it.
Totally.
Yeah, there's the tech story. There's the Upsample angle for you right there. I hope you don't like have naked copy of your website and then just let it go if you let it expire because you don't feel like maintaining it anymore. But and like archive.org, I haven't investigated the archive.org history of the site. There may be some different snapshots that you can poke around, but I'm sure there isn't a complete archive of it up until the day it went offline, which I don't even know when it was, but it was at some point in this era, in these like last couple of years.
What is your backup solution on Rhythm Changes? Does Ghost handle that for you?
Yeah, so to get technical about it, so I use Ghost to run the website because it's made for exactly the kind of thing that Rhythm Changes is. Yeah. Because it integrates hosting a website, it integrates newsletter and paid subscriptions via Stripe.
Right.
It handles that all under one roof.
Yeah.
I can do a backup of the entire site as a single JSON file.
Ooh, nice.
And then you can I haven't actually done it. I should try it, but you can re-upload that to a new Ghost plan if you lose your plan or something.
And it would work. Yeah, I mean, that's great.
Yeah. But it doesn't, like the way it does images, and this is really into the weeds too, but the way it does images is different from like a WordPress, where WordPress has like a media library that you upload images to and you can manage it that way. It's very essential for Infidels Jazz.
Sure.
We do the infidelsjazz.ca site on WordPress, and it's perfect because it's every post on the site is driven by an image. It's the graphic for the show, right? So media library is where I live when I manage that website. But then for Ghost, there's no media library that you can.
It's just pointing at a Ghost hosted URL.
It's each individual post, and there's image files in the background, but you can't go and you can't go to the media library. Everything is edited and constructed on each post. So it's a little bit different.
That is different, but I'm glad to hear there's a backup of it. And so even if everything, disaster befell, obviously working in IT, I'm always thinking about what happens. What happens when it goes down? What happens when Ghost has an outage and whoops. So glad you have a copy of that. That is great.
Yeah, I take them I take them maybe every week or so. Yeah, I will download one of those. So, you know, every time I've published something big, I think about it pretty much. So then I download it after that. So most of the time I'm current.
When you, so to bring us back to the RCP, the David Blake podcast, where you guys kind of, maybe that was the start of you feeling a little bit better about your space in the scene and like maybe what the blog and what the podcast could do for the scene or for yourself and the scene. Did you get a sense after that one when you said like that podcast had a little bit of traction? Did you get a sense that traction was like somewhat significant at the time, or is it more in retrospect that you like see that as a bump in terms of people who were checking out the podcast?
There's a few ways to look at this. One of them, which I don't think is super helpful, but it's maybe fun to note, is that nothing at that time was significant.
Right.
Like the majority of all people who are signed up to the Free Weekly right now probably signed up in the last 8 months, like over 50%.
Yeah.
So anything at that time 4 years ago wasn't significant and won't be going forward, really.
Yeah.
At the time, I didn't really look at numbers, partially because I guess I kind of understood that, or like you kind of have to believe that if it's going to make sense.
Yeah.
But really what I mean by that is it started something that's very weird that continues to this day, is that the Rhythm Changes podcast, even though it has the smallest numbers and listenership and, you know, as the smallest consumption of any product that I have in Rhythm Changes, despite that, it is the thing that is front of mind when people talk to me about it, like when they small talk with me about it, or even like when I get to sit down and hang with somebody and they ask me how things are going. That's what they ask me about. You know, they ask me about the podcast, even though I haven't hosted it for almost a year now. You know, I'm still breaking the news that our friend Chris Fraser is hosting that show, and I love that he is.
You can't shake being the podcast guy.
No.
forever a podcast guy, and here we are.
Well, yeah, here we are, right?
Still a podcast guy, still the podcast guy.
Yeah. But yeah, I get to tell people how Chris is hosting, and I'm so stoked for that. I get to keep breaking that news over and over again, so it's fun.
That's awesome. I wonder if that's to do with, like, I mean, you and I have maybe talked about this privately, that it's a funny thing that like Rhythm Changes has, you know, so many people who check out the gig list or even get the Free Weekly, and what people say to you in person is like, how's the podcast going? Is it like that people that like podcasts are just like so in the zeitgeist and that's like what they can hang on to?
It must be that. Yeah. I mean, I've joked about why this might be with some people, and we don't really know why, because it doesn't really make sense, but that must be it. It's like, it must be because not only is this the first podcast that was done in this community, really, but also everybody's been talking about podcasts for what happens to be this 5-year period that Rhythm Changes has existed. If you talk about the years 2020 to 2025, one of the things that you're going to have to talk about is the popularity of podcasts and how that played into the events of the day, right? The podcast election, podcasts during COVID, you know, all this gobbledygook.
Man. I'm curious if, so like the piece about Tangent, like the podcast episode, but then also the piece about the written piece about Daybreakers. I'm curious if those folks, either the Tangent owners or the Daybreakers folks, ever like reached out to you and were not thrilled about, or I mean, maybe this is a secondary question, like where it's a pretty low drama scene. Has anyone been not thrilled about something you've published and made that known to you?
Okay, so the Tangent owners, David Blake had a great relationship with them. I think they have probably consumed most of the David Blake content on the subject. Right. And I think they've probably been pretty happy with it.
Yeah.
But I personally don't know them.
Okay.
So I don't really know that. The Daybreakers people are probably not aware of it.
Right.
And if they are, they didn't reach out to me or anybody who was associated. So in that particular story, no. People who are not stoked, I mean, it's fortunately very few. There's not a lot that's coming to mind here.
I don't need you to name anyone. I'm just curious if you've like ever touched a nerve that even like unintentionally going like, oh, didn't mean to upset that person, or.
So yes, actually, I think there are two there are two stories that both have happy endings that I can tell that are like
great.
this.
Yeah.
So the first one, this one I will anonymize, not because it's a secret, but just because this person's identity isn't super crucial.
Sure.
Because you can imagine this happening to anybody. A veteran, long-time player in this Vancouver jazz scene. He put out a new record. And in the early days of writing for subscribers, I wrote about this because I was still trying to figure out what to write about. I was fresh to all this stuff. The Free Weekly, the subscription writing, and the gig list started all around the same time.
Sure.
I didn't do what you're supposed to do where you like build up a free audience for a long time and then
productize,
flip a switch.
Yeah.
I didn't do that. I started it all at the same time from zero. But this guy, he put out a new album. He's a legend in this scene. And I wrote about it, and I was writing like daily for subscribers at this point because I was sending like most days because I was trying to figure out what to do. It's crazy now when I look back on it. Now I do one free, one paid.
Yeah.
And sometimes there's a podcast hosted by Chris that gets posted in there. But at the time, this is what I was doing in 2020 and 2021, or really 21, 22 when I was getting it off the ground, just because I was trying to figure out what to write about. Most of the writing from this time is probably not very good, but like I'm working it out, right? I'm working on it. I was sending the Free Weekly on Tuesdays like I still am. And I was writing additionally for subscribers on Mondays, Thursdays, and Fridays.
Wow.
And I was doing an episode of RCP every week and dropping it on Wednesdays. So I had a new piece of content every day of the week in this period of time. It's so crazy.
Your reps in.
Can't do it now.
I'm just to like pause on that for a second. I guess it's like no surprise the amount of growth you've had. Like when you're like doing that much in that time frame for consistently, right? Like the writing, the putting yourself out there.
But that didn't drive growth.
No, but it's just it's the Beatles practicing in Frankfurt or whatever, every night for whatever audience.
I needed to learn.
That was your 10,000 hours, even though we don't have to talk about Malcolm Gladwell or that book.
Yeah.
But
that's its own episode. That's a different podcast that already exists.
Yeah, exactly.
That we both have listened to.
Yeah.
But this guy, his album, I wrote about it, and because I was doing this every day, and I was a little takey, right? Takesy in terms of how I was managing to do that every day. I was pretty glib about it, and I wasn't working for Seller and Corey yet, and I hadn't gotten to know Corey as an adult yet, really, and I had my views on certain things, and I was kind of like, oh, this project is like too traditional, and like it doesn't.
Sure.
It's a bunch of old guys or whatever. I am, I'm 25 or whatever, and I'm writing about this, and he reached out to me, and he was so nice about it. He didn't reach out to me to like call me out about anything particular. I already knew. He didn't need to say anything. Just the fact that he reached out to me, I already felt bad. About that.
You're like, oh shoot, I wish he didn't read that.
But he was so great about it, and he's been in my corner like ever since. Like he's been a big encourager and supporter of me, and like I've written about more music that he's made, and I've gone to hear him, and he's gone to hear me, and he's been a real pal. And supporter and encouraging me ever since.
That's a very good end to the story. So he didn't say a word about you didn't like it, or you just knew you're like, okay, maybe it was a little bit,
pretty much,
a little too cavalier about this record, and
pretty much.
You might have not written it that way if you knew he would see it.
Absolutely.
If you knew he'd be cool. Yeah.
Then the other one that's really fun is before I knew Caity Gyorgy. I like did some Junos stuff in 2022. Again, this is a period of time when I was writing every day.
Yeah.
And I wrote an article where I did this a few years afterwards too, where I tried to predict the Juno winners because I had already listened to several of the albums. Now I cover most of them, but back then it's just like, oh, I'd already heard of some of them, so I'm gonna go and listen to them all just for fun. I'm gonna predict who wins.
Yeah.
And then I predicted that she wouldn't, and that ended up being her first of now 3.
Right.
Yeah, I think now 3 wins in 2022. And then I wrote a couple other things about her and her music and how she was really taking off at this time. And I think later she found one of those pieces that she wasn't aware of. And she, again, wrote, I wasn't exactly critical of her either, but it was weird because what I now understand to be weird is what I'm doing here. I never have to write about somebody without being in touch with them.
Yeah.
I think about it as like never writing alone.
Sure.
Like I never should write alone.
Yeah.
I should be in touch with the person that I am writing about to some extent, because on one hand, even if it's just so that I can send it to them when it's done and they can share it, even if that's the only communication.
Yeah.
But to write alone the whole time is not the way I want it to come across.
Yeah.
So, I did that several times with her because I wasn't in touch with her. I want to. And then she ended up finding one of those pieces and kind of giving me more context about what she was up to at the time and how she thought about marketing this project or whatever. She took the time to write a lot of stuff to me about that. And now we've been in touch ever since. I recently interviewed her. I've written about all her records and stuff, and she's a homie. She's great. I like her and I like her music. But she ultimately, like, way after the fact, went out of her way to like engage with me in a way that I should have engaged with her from the beginning.
Right.
But I didn't.
Yeah. Like in terms of just reaching out, being like, hey, you're talking about me. Like, hello. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Good to meet you. I like the thinking about that kind of caused the realization of the more collaborative. I think that's maybe a standard almost in music journalism of like reaching out to the people who you're writing about to establish that rapport. And now that you have that rapport with so many people, I mean, it's much easier at this stage of growth, right? People know who you are. There's no big question mark. If you're just reaching out to someone random across Canada, they can just like see who you are.
There's so much coverage I can point to in the past.
Totally.
Yeah.
And good writing and a solid scene and people who can vouch for you or whatever. So definitely I could see that being much harder early on and much easier going forward.
Yeah. Early on, I didn't think I had leveraged for, or I thought I needed some leverage that I didn't have.
Yeah.
Often you realize you don't really need anything. You can just kind of ask people, and almost people either say yes or I don't have the time right now. They don't really say no.
Yeah, it's a pretty special scene that way, right? Where it's people aren't, no one's too much of a big shot.
Those people don't last.
No, yeah, exactly. Can you imagine being like too cool to like, in the size of the Canadian music scene, maybe in a bigger, if we were in New York or something, that would be different. But really, on the scale of this scene, I can't imagine anyone doing that.
Yeah, it took me a long time to realize that, though.
Yeah,
I had the blinders on of trying to get better at just the nuts and bolts of it, and I'm not a music journalist. I didn't come up as a music journalist.
Right.
There's this whole other thing. I came up playing, we did and our friends did and stuff. The music journalism thing is you come up by like freelancing for different outlets. Like I never did that. I don't have that experience. I don't have the experience of pitching or freelance writing or being edited, or I don't have that.
You DIY'd it.
Yeah, it's different.
Very cool. Well, happy to hear that you've never caused any beef with the blog or the podcast. We have done here as a potential subject a pulled punch, something that you decided to not touch. Do you want to talk about not touching it?
What is it?
The John Stetch thing.
Yeah.
Do you want to address? I was barely around during this time as far as like scene wise, and I was not paying really close attention to this whole situation as it unfolded. I mean, we've named him. It would be no secret. Like there was like news articles in the Georgia Straight about this. So I don't mean,
Yeah.
I can bleep the name if we have to, but
no, I mean, so yeah, there was a story in the community where, an artist had made a lot of political content.
Yeah.
And he had gigs at certain venues, and some of those venues canceled his gigs because of the political content.
Right.
And the political content was very provocative.
You could say that. Yeah.
Yeah. That's the diplomatic way that I'm saying it at this point.
Yeah.
And some of the venues ended up rebooking him, and some other venues booked him because of it to support him in the wake of a perceived cancellation.
Right.
Yeah.
One of those venues, I believe, was Corduroy. If
yes.
That tells listeners like what was going on.
This is in the wake of the peak COVID stuff for sure. This is the spring of 2023. So the memories of that peak COVID time and the troubles of that are very fresh.
Yes.
At this time.
Yeah.
And he loses two gigs in particular at two big venues, at Frankie's and at Tyrant.
Okay.
He ends up playing at Frankie's later, after the fact.
Okay.
But he does lose his gig at Frankie's, and he does lose his gig at Tyrant.
Right.
His gigs were not to do political content, obviously. He's a piano
jazz.
player.
Yeah.
They were to play gigs. But the political content that he made did not play in the scene at all.
Yeah.
In terms of the reception.
Yes.
So I'm here and I'm doing Rhythm Changes. I've been doing the gig list for about a year. I've been doing the podcast for about 2 years.
Yeah.
I have some people in my corner who I love and I really depend on to have my head on straight, or to try and carry myself okay at Rhythm Changes. Mm-hmm. Some of these people encourage me to do more investigative stuff and to talk about these kinds of stories. And I'm very grateful to have that encouragement from them.
Yeah.
At the same time, I don't want to do that badly.
Yes.
So I'm timid of it for sure because I'm a little afraid to do it badly.
Yeah.
I also have a good sense of what my capacity is because I've kind of focused down. Like I'm not publishing daily.
Yeah.
I'm not sending daily at this point. I've focused down what I'm doing to certain things because I've become a little bit more aware of my capacity every year.
Yeah.
There were definitely people at this time who wanted me to cover this story in some way, who wanted me to, in one individual's case, have him on the podcast, which I did not ever send that invitation.
Yeah.
I really considered it though.
Yeah.
And I still think it would have been an interesting conversation.
Would have been interesting.
Yeah. I know that part of this story involved a lot of our friends circulating a petition against him.
Right.
I was never presented the petition. I didn't sign the petition, obviously, because I wasn't presented it.
Yeah.
I actually didn't know about the petition until he started talking back to the petitioners. That was actually the first I heard of it.
That it's also, I think, when he kind of made more noise. He maybe Barbara Streisanded himself a little bit by saying like,
"Yep, that's so true." I love that you mentioned it that way.
I'm being canceled, and like no one had heard about the cancellation until he started posting about it or talking about it, and then many people, upon hearing about the controversy, doubled down on the canceling or said like, "Well, now we are because even though we hadn't heard about this and didn't care, you've brought attention to this."
Yeah, there's a Streisand effect element to this story, certainly.
Yeah.
So at the time, a little bit of encouragement to cover it. Not much encouragement to participate in it directly, honestly. Like you could imagine there are different ways where I could have ended up participating in it directly.
Right.
But I didn't really. And it was funny the way that worked out. I kind of just ended up watching it happen.
Yeah.
And when I realized that, here's where I quickly landed on this. Like, what did I do on the gig list itself? When his gigs were still booked,
yeah.
I had those gigs on the list.
Sure.
When they were canceled, I took them off the list.
Yep.
And his future gigs that he booked, I put those gigs on the list.
Right.
Because that's what I'm doing, right?
Yeah, you're reporting what gigs are happening in the city and people can do with that information what they want.
I've got people in my audience who would support him, and I've got hundreds and hundreds of people who wouldn't. Like I know there's a disparity there, but I know I have both people in my audience. I do.
Right. Yeah.
So on the gig list, it just is what it is. I didn't end up initiating any coverage with him or with anybody else who was like directly involved in the story. The reason why was, here's how I felt about it. I was like, it's the spring of 2023. This is a big thing right now that a lot of people are talking about. My gut feeling here is that this story is not going to really matter in 1 to 2 years or beyond that.
Right.
Just because it was a widely talked about thing at the time, it doesn't mean that I want to read it into the record and give it more prominence than I think it deserves. Like at the end of the day, that's like your biggest power as an editor of something, right? Whether you use it intentionally or unintentionally.
Yeah.
Like whether you just miss something because you ignored it or you decide to not cover something.
Yeah.
That's, if there's anything that you're doing, that's what you're doing. You're shaping what you're choosing to talk about and what you're not. And if I have the luxury of not being involved in a story and I can choose to not talk about a story like that, I'm going to take it.
Totally.
That's how I thought about it at the time.
Yeah, and you get to keep the blog to be about about the music, about the things that you are excited about, and the things that you're enjoying, and yeah.
And if I have any hot take about this story, it's that this story was not one that caused direct physical harm to anybody in our scene.
Right.
This was a story about like content and offensive content.
Yeah.
And reactions to it and people's curation, the venue's curational choices about how they felt about that. Yeah. I think that's up to them. I thought I didn't have anything to add to that.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody really needs to care what Rhythm Changes thinks about that.
No, yeah.
And I don't think I need to break it down. I broke down, even though I wasn't involved in the Coastal Jazz board transition, I broke that down and I covered that, even though I wasn't involved.
Well, it was
because I
relevant.
thought that was super duper duper relevant. People would still talk about it. Maybe they're not right now, but I think it is. I think it is still relevant. I don't think this particular thing in the spring of 2023 with this guy is relevant anymore.
Totally irrelevant. And good contrast with the Coastal Jazz stuff, because that was controversial opinions, petitions even, I think.
Well, yeah, a lot of controversy for sure, and like big ramifications to kind of who was in charge and what direction they were going to go. Like even like a week ago, I sent the link to my YouTube video about the Coastal Jazz situation to like a Toronto musician who wasn't familiar with the story, because I brought it up and then I found out that he wasn't familiar, and I was like, oh, you don't know about this? I'll show this to you. So in that sense, like, still, I'm not gonna imagine I made a video about John Stetch and it's like I'm gonna be pulling this out to show this to somebody now about no
man. Well, I'm I think a bullet dodged there and having to like admire yourself in a whole thing.
Yeah.
I want to talk about, man, we have a whole bunch of these history points and stories we can pull at. Where do you want to go with this? There's like so many.
Well, thanks for your driving in this one. We talk about the production process because we got our laptops in front of us this time, so you can see who's driving. But you can't when we record online. But Carson's driving on this one because he's got the things in front of him. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, this is a good chance to reflect on some of this stuff, because like when that thing that we just talked about, whose podcast episode or whose interview would I ever want to inject that subject into? Nobody's, right?
No,
so it's like,
it's terrible.
Yeah.
Tell me about the heatwave jazz fest, and I'm trying to remember how much I remember about this.
Oh, this is a good one. There's so much in this 21, 22. Yeah. These are dark times in a lot of ways, but it's formative times for Rhythm Changes. Okay, so there's a few. I put this down in the notes, and I didn't really reveal how significant this is. Can you read verbatim what that line of notes so that I make sure I hit all these points?
Heatwave, Jazz Fest Pass, and Thad's show at Ocean Artworks.
Great. Okay, so there are several different pieces to this. This is a hugely important story that shaped Rhythm Changes. So in the summers of 21 and 2022, there were huge heat waves right around the time of the Jazz Fest. The 21 heat wave was particularly intense. It was a lot more intense than any other one that had happened in our lifetimes.
That was the one where there was like several deaths on the weekend, right? Like the 40-degree, really, really bad heat
and
wave.
This was during a tumultuous time of like COVID communications and what people were doing to manage COVID too. So this was like another like thing that the BC government was communicating about all the time that was causing a lot of havoc. For people. So yeah, it was really challenging. Summer of 21, I was living in New West with Vez and a roommate in a second floor suite, and it was,
it was hot,
ridiculously hot. Our thermostat would show 35 plus degrees when we get home.
Oh man.
I'll never forget, I had a fun time, one of my first 10 episodes of RCP with improvising cellist Marina Hasselberg.
Yep.
I recorded that episode on Zoom, not in person, because I told somebody this and they thought I did this in person with my feet in an ice bath.
Amazing.
Not in person.
Oh, man.
This wasn't visible. But this was in Zoom.
Yeah.
And my mom also lives in New West, and her place was super hot as well. And so actually for part of this heat wave, my mom and Vez and we actually bailed out, and my mom booked nights at the Inn at the Key in New West, and they had AC.
That's great.
And we crashed there, and it was And like the paddle wheeler at the time, like the pub on New Westminster Quay, was closed because it was too hot and like the staff couldn't work in there, and obviously nobody wanted to be on the patio. So yeah, the heat wave. So the heat wave also meant, even though it's the Vancouver International Jazz Festival is returning this summer after having not happened, and so this is my first Rhythm Changes Jazz Fest. This is my first kick at the can.
Yeah.
And again, audience size at this time, nothing. No free weekly email yet, or at least not with the gig list.
No gig
and
list.
And there's podcast. I'm doing podcast every week, but I'm not writing a lot yet. That's all still yet to come. But Rhythm Changes does exist, kind of. So this is my first kick at the can. This is my first chance to do what I'm about to do this weekend and all through next week and be out there. But I don't do very much of it because of this heat wave. I'm just zonked.
Yeah.
Now, what I did decide to do at this time, even I didn't have the gig list or free weekly structure yet, but and it's funny because this involves Chris Fraser as well.
Yeah.
I actually reached out to Chris and I was like, you know what we should do? We should put up a landing page and try and gather email signups and tell them that we are going to go out to stuff at the Jazz Fest and we're going to recap it in written form.
Yeah.
Each day after, and write about what we saw the previous day.
Yeah.
I reached out to Chris and told him that idea.
Yeah.
And I was like, do you want to do this with me? And he was like, sure. So at this time, I got my friend Eva Zhu, who created the Rhythm Changes logo.
Okay.
And Eva's actually a music journalist, like a real music journalist. Right. But for fun, in 2020, when I started writing Rhythm Changes, I got Eva to computer draw over a photo of me and put orange as the background because it's my favorite color.
Right.
And that has been the Rhythm Changes logo ever since. So I got Eva to make a similar drawing of Chris. Okay. Because at the time, in the summer of 2021, I wanted to put him and me side by side.
I love that.
And advertise this thing. And so I made a little landing page for this thing. And I wrote about what we wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
Go to the... And I was a very online guy at this time, 26 years old, COVID brain, drinking brain.
Yeah.
And, I wrote whatever I thought would be an enticing piece of landing page copy to get people to sign up. I really do wish I had a copy of it to share with you right now.
Right.
But I don't think I do. But what I do know was that during this heat wave, we sent this out, and like I think the first couple days, I don't even remember what I saw necessarily, but Chris saw a couple things, and we sent out a few issues of this. We got like maybe 30, 40 signups. So actually we got like a percentage of who we launched the free weekly with in the spring of 2022. They came in for this idea.
Right.
We started doing this, and then Coastal Jazz found out that we started doing this.
Okay.
And somebody at Coastal Jazz did not, whatever I wrote on that page, somebody at Coastal Jazz didn't like it.
Oh,
like
interesting.
they thought they sent me a long email.
Not like a real cease and desist, but just a like, not a literal, not a legal cease and desist.
For all intents and purposes, it was a cease and desist.
Okay,
yeah, that's absolutely right. But it was a friendly enough one. And I think this person used the word disrespectful. I mean, I don't think I said anything disrespectful, to be honest. What I chalk this up to, when I'm looking back, it was 40 degrees outside most of these days. And I am sure that I annoyed somebody.
Sure.
Disrespectful, I think, is a really strong word. But I'm sure I could have said a few things that could have annoyed some people. I always have a chip on my shoulder, so.
They were annoyed about the existence of the landing page, or something you said?
They were annoyed about how I presented it. Okay. And again, I wish I had a copy of it, and I would actually go through it. But like, I don't know what I said on this thing, and I don't know what it's been 4 years now. I don't remember what they said they didn't like.
Funny.
But they didn't like it, and I kind of understood. Again, like this other guy whose music I wrote about not too kindly. They didn't have to say anything. They did in this case. The coastal people, they did say several things to me, but this is all water under the bridge now. At this point, this person doesn't work at Coastal Jazz anymore.
You've managed to squash the beef with Coastal, and
there's no active beef.
No.
there really hasn't been at any point ever since this. None that I've felt, and I don't think any that I would have caused either. So I'm sure that's all okay. But at the time, and then I told Chris, I was like, man, I got this, response from this.
Yeah.
This heat wave situation is really tough. Let's kind of can this idea. We started it. I don't know how much stuff I'm going to go to. So let's tell the people that we're not going to be active on this thing, but thank them for signing up and stuff. So we did. We stopped.
Okay.
So that like daily newsletter thing was short-lived.
Got it.
Now, obviously the funny part about that later is, 3 years after that, I get to use that drawing of Chris when he becomes the host.
I was going to say, that's the actual drawing, isn't it? I was like, that's so funny. Okay.
But, and we collected some emails there. There was like only one other thing that I went to for the rest of the festival. And it was Thad Bailey-Mai, our friend who we have made recordings with, trumpet player. He's playing at this year's festival too.
Yeah.
He played towards the end of the festival that year at Ocean Artworks, which is the same place that my one festival gig this year is at. So I went to go see Thad.
Yeah.
And when I didn't really feel like going either because I felt pretty crappy about this experience that I just had. But I was like, I got to go see my friend Thad.
Yeah.
So that got me out the door.
Yeah.
So then I get down there and I'm waiting in line for Ocean Artworks because they're like processing people again because of COVID stuff.
Sure.
They're limiting how many people are in there. So I'm standing in line and I'm actually behind Cole Schmidt, who's the most recent guest on the Rhythm Changes podcast right now. It's out and he joined us pre-festival, which is awesome. Thank you, Cole. Cole Schmidt and his partner, Amélie Malissard, they're in line in front of me. Okay. I don't really know them. So they introduced themselves to me.
Yeah.
I can still talk about Rhythm Changes podcast at this point because it exists.
Yeah.
So they were aware of it, I'm pretty sure. So, we talked about the podcast and we talked about how much we were excited to see Thad and, we got some context about like who we were and, even though I knew who Cole was obviously, but they kind of knew who I was already and we had some way to like build a little bit of rapport and context. And then as we were walking in and we went to go find our seats, Amélie said to me, hey, if there's anybody you want me to introduce you to who you would like to have on the podcast and you don't know, let me know.
Whoa.
So she says that.
Yeah.
Summer of 21. I'm on like episode 12 or something at this point. And I was like, oh, cool. And so then like a month passes and then I find this guy called Tim Reinert who is like, he has like this Mixcloud show where he's just like spinning people's jazz music. And I find out that he is about to start a record label and put out an album by Kenton Lowen and JP Carter.
His label started that long ago?
Yeah. So summer of 21, he's about to start this. I found out that this album was about to come out.
Yeah.
And so I wrote to Amélie and I'm like, hey, can you introduce me to Tim?
Yeah.
I don't know him.
Wow.
So she introduced me to Tim by email in August of 2021.
Yeah.
And the first conversation I ever had with Tim is on the Rhythm Changes podcast. It's like one of those early episodes.
Wow.
And we recorded that before he started presenting any shows. The only thing he was doing at the time that I talked to him about, I didn't know his background. I didn't know all I knew about him was that he was putting out this Kenton Lowen and JP Carter record and starting this label.
That's so crazy.
And then he would go on to start presenting at Numbers and at Kevin Romaine's coffee shop and at all these other places. And one thing led to another. And now look where he is, right?
Yeah.
It's incredible. And I've got to witness it all.
Definitely. And you work with him in some capacity as well. That is such a weird timing thing. That hot summer. I don't even know if I went to any shows because I was here for that heat wave and it was really, really bad.
Yeah. I mean, the next year was bad too, but I remember the first one as being the worst.
That was really brutal. Man, that's full circle.
So who knows under what circumstances I would have met him if it weren't for like that sequence of events. And
now I've got a record from Tim's label. Kenton, we went to a show on my birthday of Kenton and JP and
their second one. Yeah, exactly.
I got their second record. Oh, actually, no, I bought the Knee Jerk record, but I was there for the release of the second record as well. Man, that is crazy. That is crazy. I'm going to pivot slightly. We're getting kind of in the back half here. I am curious, again, tech angle. We've talked about this maybe personally, but what's the what's the productivity stack of Rhythm Changes? We talked about Ghost, like that's the actual platform it's hosted on. But like, how do you keep yourself organized? And you handle so many things. You have the gig list. You've got, I'm sure, a gajillion people to email. You've got, have to store your notes. You've got to do this. Like, what's the like software productivity stack like for you on this bad boy? I don't know if
on my ThinkPad.
The camera can probably see. It's like 6 inches thick. It's like a piece of cake.
That's great. So this can't be cake. Yeah. We're talking about Upsample episode titles.
Exactly.
Oh gosh. Yeah. So on website in the Ghost editor, it's been nice because when I've had contributors, you can get the contributors to write straight into there. Right. So that was pretty helpful. Yeah. You could create them a contributor account. You've done this actually.
I have, yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes I set them up for the people. I can't remember if I did that for you or
you
not.
You did,
but yeah. So it does exactly what I want it to do. It's the right website platform for me.
Do you draft in the Ghost editor?
Yeah, so I don't write digitally anywhere else except within article drafts itself in Ghost.
Okay.
However, I do a fair bit of scratching on paper.
Okay.
I do. And when I'm gathering links and stuff, my early drafts in the Ghost editor are very much just link dumps, and like I sketch out the track list of a record and I make like spaces for me to drop in things.
Got it.
And then it's quite important to me to have different ways to pull stuff in there as quickly as possible. So there's a few routes I go to for that. One of them is writing on paper, taking photos of the paper, whatever that feature is called that lets you copy and paste text out of a photo.
Nice.
Another one is speaking into a voice recorder and then transcribing my voice and then dropping it in there.
Oh, interesting.
I do a lot of that.
Interesting.
Yeah. I do a lot of that when I'm listening to music. I will listen to an album, and depending on how tight my deadline is, I will either track by track, like I will stop the track and then I will speak and then play the next track and then speak. And I'll alternate like that.
Kind of less context switching from having to listen and then go into writing mode, turning off the ears a little bit or something. And
yeah, I like to not be writing while I'm listening. Sometimes I do it because sometimes I don't leave myself enough time. But I will either do that like track by track thing where I will listen voice memo, or I'll listen to the whole thing and I'll do a big voice memo at the end. That's if I'm looking for like what stood out to me. But if I'm just looking for what's actually happening in the record, then I'll go track by track. Because otherwise I won't remember like some of the details.
Yeah. Great.
And ideally I'll do both.
Okay.
Like I try to never write about anything that I haven't listened to at least twice.
Got it.
Yeah. Ideally three times.
Yeah.
Is kind of where I want to be at. But I'll try never to write about something that I've only listened to once. I just guilty conscience.
Yeah. Well, what about your fleet of AI agents that does all the listening?
Oh dear.
That does all the listening for you. Can they just listen for it three times and kind of give you their sense?
I'm sure they can. Yeah, I'm sure we could do we keep referencing VO3. I'm sure we could do a nice video of us sitting here too.
Yeah, exactly.
So I do a lot of voice to text, in different configurations. When I'm working with interviews that end up getting published as text, obviously I have to do that.
Sure.
I can do, AI passes first time, second time, and then I'll never publish an interview transcript that I haven't manually edited all the way through because I don't know what's going to be in there.
Sure. Yeah. Who knows?
If I don't. So there's a lot of stuff involving like voice to text that I rely on a lot. I'm just in the G Suite, so I'm just using Google Sheets to track a lot of stuff manually. So I'm tracking kind of upcoming releases that way. Yeah. I'm pretty up on that. Every time I see social posts about new releases, I'll toss that info in. I will try and find a link to that album's like Bandcamp page or like pre-release streaming page so that I have it ready to go. I want to know how many releases there are coming up that I have to watch for.
Mm-hmm.
That's a priority. And then for the gig list, the gig list is built on a Google Sheet.
Right. Yeah.
And I am manually populating that sheet often. I'm very quick at it because I've done it a lot.
Yeah.
I would love to figure out more ways that I could use AI to make that process easier. I've been so far unsuccessful.
So like write web scrapers and stuff. And I think probably a lot of the information is really...
it's in Instagram,
really. Instagram. stories and be very, very hard.
I don't know. We're not there. I don't think we're there yet, right? Like we can't scrape that kind of stuff.
No, and Instagram will never make like an API you can use to like do that. You could.
Yeah, they really wouldn't want to let you do that. That's so
you
true.
could make an account. There are ways. I can think of harder ways that you could do it, but they're not good. They would be violating Instagram
terms of service.
And I'm not going to say them out loud on a podcast in case one day you decide to experiment.
In case one day Zuck comes for us. Yeah,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
that's really interesting. I mean, interesting to me. I'm not sure. I hope that's useful for someone who's like curious on the technical side of things, because I like hearing about how people work.
I think the most important technical hurdle to solve is how do you reduce the friction between your creative writing and everything else?
Right.
How do you give yourself more space to write even if you are speaking and then transcribing?
Yeah.
What kind of space do you create for yourself to write, and is it possible for you to remove the friction, or is there some part of the friction that's desirable? Like ideally, I often enjoy it the most when I have had more time to listen to the stuff. Like this is not something that is meant to be optimized entirely. Yes. So how much are you going to optimize that?
Yeah. I mean, that's what my joke about the AI agents. It's like, obviously like that's what you would hope to get out of this whole project, is like the ability to like engage deeply with some music that you like, and get to experience that and get your own opinions and get to write about it. It's pretty cool. Yeah.
I also am I try to be very judicious about incoming pitches.
Okay.
I try to say no often. Like I don't just not reply to most pitches.
Yeah.
I try to say no often because I find that most of the times the types of low effort publicity pitches that I get that I want to not get, if I say no enough times, I stop getting them.
Every week I email Will my house music, my AI generated house music project, and every week he emails me. I have not stopped because I think persistence is king.
Yeah. Oh dear. Yeah. There's a couple of publicists who I like and I still say no too often, and then I pick up the odd thing here and there. But yeah, I think that's helped because I've done that the whole way.
That's great.
And the publicists, they get to know me a little bit.
Yeah, you get a relationship with those folks.
They just want to hear something back. The worst thing when you're doing that is you don't get any responses. Yeah,
totally. To just not know. I mean, it's like applying for jobs or whatever. The politest thing you can do is say like, "Thanks, but no thanks."
Yeah, and I'm not perfect. There's still pitches that I don't get around to saying no to, but I try to say something over 80% of the time for sure.
Wow, I mean that's impressive because I'm sure you get a lot, and that's a lot of work, man. All right, the last thing I want to get to here on our list of talking points is, why is your Infidels t-shirt the most meaningful piece of clothing that you own?
Oh boy. Oh, this is such a great thing to end on. Yeah. I would have worn it today, but I packed it when I went away this weekend, and so I already wore it, and I wanted to wear orange.
You're wearing the orange, which is good.
We got the Sunrun shirt with the Cal Tire sponsorship on it, so Cal Tire, the check better be in the mail.
Represent.
So this is close to that story I told about the heat wave and that sort of thing. And obviously it intersects right on the back of that story because I met Tim by having him on the podcast.
Of course.
So I met Tim, and then within a couple of weeks after I met him, he started presenting shows for the first time. And one of the places that he did that was Numbers Cabaret.
Yeah.
On Davie Street.
Short-lived as a jazz venue.
I think there were only 5 shows. Yeah. I think business is still around. Yeah.
It is not doing jazz.
Not that it would be the place that either of us would frequent very much, I don't think. But it, he comes out with these shows, and they're, people go. Like I go, and we saw a lot of our people there, and it got that kind of Infidels Jazz shows thing off to a good start.
Yeah.
That space at Numbers. And so one of the shows he did there, I went to all of them. I went to all 5. One of the shows he did there was in mid-December of 2021. I think it was December 15th. Whatever the date is, it says it in my RCP episode with Todd Stewart. Okay. And this was the day that I met Todd, because I went to that show, and it was like the Brad Turner Quartet, but Todd was playing drums.
Right.
Because Dylan Vanderskyfe, who was a big guy for you, living in Australia,
right,
and he wasn't on this gig. So that Brad asked Todd, who was in his early 20s at the time.
Yeah.
To come out, and he's a heavy drummer now, obviously, and he plays with all
good.
kinds of people. But this was like Todd's first big gig, or at least that's how I saw it.
Yeah, I was certainly his biggest by a long shot by that point. Yeah. So I don't know if it's his first big gig, but it was really big.
Yeah. And he was ready. I mean, I was there and it was great and he did great. And then I introduced myself to him and I was like, hey, do you want to come on the podcast and talk about this gig and how it was? And,
yeah,
you know, I ended up having a good episode with him and I know him well now and it's cool. That happened to be my introduction to him. But what I really remember that same night for was, you know, Tim had started selling Infidels t-shirts at his shows.
Yeah.
And I wanted to get one. I knew I wanted to get one. Now, at this time, December 2021, this is like, I am at rock bottom.
Yeah.
I am personally like, I'm not making any money. I'm not doing any work really. I'm doing a lot of rhythm changes stuff and I'm getting better. Yeah. And, you know, bless Vez. Vez reminds me of that all the time. And it was like, oh, you were working on your thing at that point. And it's like, you have to work on your thing for it to turn into something.
Right. But it was not feeling like a success yet.
No, absolutely not.
No wins on the chalkboard that fall or that winter. Yeah.
Yeah. Not looking out for myself, not taking care of business, not making it, not paying the bills, not doing none of that. You know, Vez was working and I was doing a couple gigs, right?
Yeah.
And that was kind of all I had.
Yeah.
My situation was getting worse. It was going downhill. I was into there was a line of credit phase and then there was a credit card phase.
Okay.
And the average interest rate was increasing.
Okay. Yeah. It's not good.
At this period of time. And my personal debt load was increasing into this winter of 2021. All I had to show for it was whatever couple gigs I was doing. And, thanks very much to Anthony Santorini, who's one of the few people who still handed me gigs at this point.
Yeah.
And you know, some little bit of, awareness from my friends and quite a bit of help from my family and encouragement and stuff like that too, to keep me with it. And then a lot of like drinking and stuff and, you know, that's spending money there too. So that's making it worse. So there's like this drinking feedback loop, that's going on, through the year 2021. And this all really comes to a head in like, December. And it's really, really not a good point for me. And I was in the denial phase of the average interest rate increasing.
Sure.
I was at the part where I was not looking.
Right.
You know, I was not looking.
Yeah.
I didn't know exactly what my number was at in terms of my escalating debt load. So at the end of this show, I had an awesome time. I met Todd. I'm going to do a podcast episode with him afterwards too. Tim is this guy who I've known for a couple months.
Yep.
And he's cool. And I like to check out what he's up to. I feel like I'm making friends again and stuff like that. So I go up to his merch table.
Yeah.
And I buy myself an Infidels t-shirt. And I tap my card and I buy it on Square.
Yeah.
Walk out of there with the Infidels Jazz t-shirt.
Yeah. Get
on the SkyTrain, go home. Get on the SkyTrain, check my phone. I get a notification that I have exceeded my credit limit.
Oh.
On the credit card that I used to purchase it.
That's really... man.
Went through. You know, I bought the shirt and it went through.
That's really funny.
So this December 15th or maybe 16th, if it's after midnight, 2021.
Yeah.
I decide when I'm on this train home, okay, I've had enough of this crap.
Yeah.
I'm going to stop drinking.
Yeah.
By New Year's, if I can help it. And I did on Christmas.
Yep.
And I don't really know how I'm going to turn this around, but I know that I'm gonna. And so I'm going to figure it out.
Man.
So that's my Infidels t-shirt.
Wow.
I don't think Tim knows that either. So I'll have to clip this for him and like force him to watch it.
That is so wild. And I've seen you in that t-shirt many a time. And what a cool start to this new, phase of your life, your journey. And 3.5 years past that point, things are looking really, really good for you.
I hope so.
So congrats on 5 years of rhythm changes. I think it's a huge credit to the scene. I know everyone, of our friends that I talk to about it is just happy it exists. It's a great resource in the gig list. It's a great, archival space to keep track of things. it's super important. And I think I'm super proud of you. I think it's really cool what to do. And thank you for kind of walking me through some of those stories and that background. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, man. I enjoyed having the time to hang and chat about some of these things that I haven't had the chance to.
Do you have a recommendation for the listeners, viewers?
Yeah, so I'm going to have to swipe another album that I have posted about on Rhythm Changes that I want to emphasize again here, just because this is such a cool area for me, and I have to single it out. So it's a French-Canadian group, but this is like one of the bands that I've found that is, it matches me so well, because this is a group that like mixes jazz and like fiddling and music like that. And so the band's name is Lumigmag. That's the name of the band. It's run by this guitar player. It's got like guitar, fiddle, and some other instruments. And they're on their third album. And I included I think it's their third full-length album. Yeah, I included their third album in like my first kind of Rhythm Changes hit that I called Across Canada, where I'm writing about albums from the rest of Canada beyond BC. And this is one of my favorite albums of the year. The album is called Ce qui tourne dans l'air. That's the name of their third album. Okay. And I'm definitely going to shout it out here because it is standing out to me as one that I've come back to. When you listen to it, you'll be like, oh yeah, this sounds like Will, or sounds like things. So I hope I get to meet these guys. Yeah. I mean, I know they're like French first language and they're out there, and I don't think they have a tour out here anytime soon, but there's mutuals, and I really love what these guys are doing. All their albums are cool. They're different, but where they've arrived at on this one, it really hits for me. So I'm gonna pick that. When I'm heading into the Jazz Fest, all the stuff I'm going to see, I'm probably still going to be spinning that record a little bit when I'm going home.
That's awesome. I'll have to check that out. All right, mine for this week, I am going to get to see one of my favorite bands of all time on Friday.
Here we go.
Punch Brothers at the Telluride Bluegrass Festival in Telluride, Colorado.
This is one of the biggest bluegrass festivals out there, right?
It's the biggest one in the U.S. Yeah. I'm not sure. I don't know if they claim biggest in the world. It's huge, apparently, as far as attendance and the artists they get. I'm just going on the one day. Didn't want to couldn't spring for a whole weekend camping pass. So my recommendation. I mean, I'm not breaking news by saying Punch Brothers are a great band. If you've never checked them out, you should. One of my favorite albums of theirs is a sleeper hit, All Ashore. I think their kind of earlier stuff like Anti-Stigmatic and or Antifogmatic and Phosphorescent Blues are kind of like their more well-known albums. All Ashore won a Grammy for Best Folk Recording or Best Folk Album, I think. And it's got just like really nice tunes on it, good songs, some instrumentals. I'm very excited to see them, and I think everyone on a hot summer's day is nothing better than bluegrass.
Yeah. Oh, I can't wait to hear about that festival. It's gonna be so sick. Can you pull up the album cover? I want to see if I can remember which one it is.
Red Wave.
Oh, yeah. See, I don't know this one super well. I was thinking of the even older one that I saw, the Who's Feeling Young Now. That's the album that I know probably the best. But yeah, no, I haven't really listened to this record. So there you go. That's why it's a good rec. I have to actually listen to it.
2018, 2022's Hell on Church Street, also very good. They're geniuses. They're crazy.
Yeah. All right, it's summertime. Yeah. We're gonna have to get out there and get after it. Vancouver International Jazz Festival starting now. Yep. I'm gonna be out there living it up. Carson's gonna be out at the Telluride. Mm-hmm. So we'll tell you about it later.
No. All right, thank you for coming over, man. This was a blast.
Yeah, dude. Thank you.
All right, cheers.